I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are packing a suitcase. You're standing in your bedroom, folding your clothes, and you hear that heavy, definitive click of the latches snapping shut.
Right, that very final sound.
Exactly. You take one final look around, you walk out the door, and, in your bones, you are never coming back.
Mhm.
I mean, that is the classic, almost cinematic image we all have of migration, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I'm the expert for this deep dive, by the way. And yeah, migration is almost always pitched to us as a one-way street, a permanent severance from the old world.
I'm your host, and welcome to today's Deep Dive.
Yeah.
We are jumping into a sack of research today that completely shatters that linear narrative. Because when you look at the modern Jamaican diaspora specifically, analyzing the data from the 1990s through to the present day, that one-way street completely vanishes.
It really does. It's a paradigm shift in understanding modern transnational communities. The sources detail this concept called circularity.
Right? Circularity, where people, culture, and massive amounts of capital don't just leave an island. They are in this constant strategic state of flowing back and forth.
Yeah, and to grasp how this circularity functions today for you listening, you have to look at the psychological and economic shift that happened toward the end of the 20th century.
Because the 1970s migrations were very different.
Extremely different. If you analyze the migration waves out of Jamaica in the 1970s, many of those departures were fundamentally driven by, well, economic desperation.
There was a distinct finality to it.
Exactly. But as we move into the 1990s, the borders defining these waves really began to blur. Leaving the island was no longer this final goodbye.
It became like a localized strategy for global survival. You weren't packing that suitcase to abandon your home. You were packing it to go out into the world, gather resources in stronger economies, and funnel them directly back to the island.
Precisely. The diaspora essentially matured into a highly fluid, highly organized network. It's the continuous flow of people and money between Jamaica and its massive enclaves in places like North America and the UK.
But let's look at the physical reality of that connection for a second, because, you can't just eat cultural connection, right? You can't pay the light bill with a transnational identity.
No, you certainly cannot. It ultimately comes down to money.
And the evolution of how that capital moved is just fascinating. The research highlights the barrel children culture of the mid-20th century as the starting point.
Yes, the logistics of that era were incredibly physical. Parents would migrate to the US or the UK for work, and they would send actual physical industrial shipping barrels back to their families in Jamaica.
I can only imagine the sheer logistics of this in the 80s and 90s. You're not just pulling out your phone and sending a wire transfer. You are essentially playing high-stakes, real-life Tetris.
Oh, completely.
You're packing these massive cardboard and metal barrels with canned goods, winter coats, school supplies, maybe a smuggled toy or a stereo, just trying to maximize every square inch of space before shipping it across the ocean.
It was a literal lifeline, supplemental family income arriving on a cargo ship. But as the research shows, by the 1990s and 2000s, this evolved far beyond a few barrels of clothes and canned sausages.
It transitioned into a highly formalized digital system of financial life support, right?
Exactly. We are talking about the macroeconomic pillar of remittances.
And just to ground this in the data for you, listener, the scale of this capital shift is staggering. The sources show that today, these financial inflows account for roughly 19% of Jamaica's gross domestic product.
It's massive.
19% of the entire nation's economic output is generated outside its borders.
It totals over 3.5 billion US dollars annually. But to really understand the mechanics of why this shift from physical barrels to a $3.5 billion structural pillar happened, we have to look at the concurrent collapse of the domestic economy.
Right, the banana trade. The sources point to a massive economic void opening up in the late 90s.
Exactly. For generations, traditional agricultural exports, specifically the banana trade, were the backbone of the Jamaican economy. But in the late 1990s and into the 2000s, European trade protections were systematically dismantled.
Let's drill into the mechanism of that for a second. How does a policy shift in Europe destroy an agricultural sector in the Caribbean?
It comes down to international trade rulings. The World Trade Organization essentially forced the European Union to drop its preferential treatment for Caribbean agricultural imports.
Oh, wow. So suddenly Jamaican farmers were forced to compete on the open market.
Right, against massive multinational agricultural conglomerates in Latin America, companies that could produce bananas at a fraction of the cost.
So the domestic agricultural sector just suffered these devastating structural blows.
The bottom entirely fell out of the market.
So you have this massive crater in the national economy.
Hmm.
And the diaspora essentially steps in as a decentralized economy to fill that void.
That's a great way to put it.
Instead of exporting bananas to survive, the nation is effectively exporting human capital. That human capital is generating revenue from nursing shifts in London, construction jobs in Toronto, and corporate roles in New York, and beaming it straight back to the island.
It is a remarkable adaptation of a labor market. Relying on a 19% GDP remittance rate makes a nation uniquely vulnerable to foreign labor market fluctuations, of course.
Right, if the U.S. economy dips, remittances dip.
Exactly. But it also creates a highly resilient, diversified income stream that isn't dependent on local weather patterns or single crop yields.
And you can actually see the physical manifestation of this abstract global economy when you look at the island itself. The sources highlight the long lines at Western Union branches across rural and urban Jamaica.
Yeah, those lines are iconic at this point.
When you see those lines, you aren't just looking at people picking up $50 for a birthday. You are looking at the physical infrastructure of a transnational survival strategy.
Right, that capital flow is how houses get built. It's how university fees get paid, and how the entire local retail economy manages to stay afloat despite domestic industrial downturns.
So capital flows back very easily in the digital age. But the research points out a crucial secondary phase, this circularity. Eventually, the people who spend decades sending that money well, they want to follow it.
Which brings us to a really fascinating dynamic in the data, the flow of people, specifically the phenomenon of the returning resident.
Because if the government is suddenly relying on this decentralized global workforce, how do they bring that accumulated wealth back home permanently?
Well, the unspoken psychological goal for the Global Jamaican was rarely to just send money home indefinitely and retire in the cold.
Right.
The ultimate ambition, deeply embedded in the culture of the diaspora, was always repatriation.
Think about the endurance that requires.
Yeah.
You have people enduring freezing, bitter cold Toronto winters for 20, 30 years.
Oh, yeah.
You have individuals working grueling, endless night shifts in London hospitals or putting in long, back-breaking hours on New York factory floors. And the entire time, the psychological anchor is the goal of eventually taking all of that hard-earned value and returning home.
And in 1992, the Jamaican government officially recognized this demographic reality and actively leaned into it. They implemented a series of customs concessions specifically designed for these returning residents.
I have to push back on the mechanics of this for a second just to clarify. From a purely economic standpoint, the 1992 policy allowed these returnees to import their accumulated household goods and even vehicles completely tax-free.
Yes, that's correct.
For a developing economy that desperately needs tax revenue, letting people bring in cars and luxury goods without paying import duties sounds like a massive loss of government income. Why roll out the red carpet like that?
It's a calculated macroeconomic trade-off. Kingston was taking a short-term hit on import taxes to secure a massive long-term injection of capital and skills.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
By incentivizing the final stage of that circular migration loop, they were attracting decades of foreign pensions, high-level professional skills, and liquid wealth. That money gets deposited into local banks and spent in the local economy for the next 20 to 30 years of those residents' retirements.
It's essentially a nationwide talent and wealth repatriation program. And I love how this completely subverts the traditional immigrant dream that we're always fed in the West.
It really does.
Because the standard narrative is that you move to a new country, you work hard, you assimilate, you become part of the great melting pot, and your kids grow up as Americans or Canadians or Brits. The ultimate goal, supposedly, is to stay and belong to the new host nation.
That's a very sharp observation, and the data clearly challenges that assumption. For many in this diaspora, the host country was simply a workplace.
A prolonged economic deployment?
Exactly. The home was always Jamaica.
The visual from the research that really hammers this home is the Kingston wharves in the 1990s. Imagine these massive, heavy shipping containers arriving by the dozens. but they aren't filled with commercial imports for retail stores.
No, they're filled with the entire accumulated lives of an aging generation.
You have people bringing back specialized medical equipment, construction tools, leather sofas, and vehicles. And they use these resources to fundamentally alter the physical landscape of the island.
They literally changed the geography of the rural parishes. The sources detail how expansive, beautiful retirement homes, often referred to locally as returning resident homes, were being built across the exact same rural areas these individuals had left decades prior when they had almost nothing.
It is the ultimate realization of the circular journey.
It is. But wait, if the Jamaican government is rolling out the red carpet with tax breaks for returnees in 1992, we have to reconcile that with another data set in our sources.
Right, because just a few years later, the research shows a massive wave of involuntary returns. You have this sudden influx of people arriving in Kingston with absolutely nothing.
Yes. The data forces us to look at the fractured reality of modern circularity. While thousands were returning voluntarily in triumph, there was a simultaneous parallel flow of people being returned involuntarily. We have to look at the darker side of this transnational network.
The data in our sources points to a massive shift in international law in the late 90s. Now, our goal here is to impartially report on the source material regardless of political leaning, and the economic and demographic outcome documented in the research was absolute.
Right.
The primary catalyst cited is the U.S. Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996.
This specific piece of legislation, along with similar tightening policies in Canada and the UK during the same era, fundamentally altered the risk profile of the diaspora. In practice, the 1996 Act triggered an immediate, sharp spike in deportations.
We are talking about thousands of Jamaicans being forcibly returned to the island. But what is the actual mechanism there? How does one law suddenly cause a massive spike in deportations of people who, in many cases, had lived in the U.S. legally for decades?
The mechanism was largely retroactive reclassification. The 1996 Act retroactively reclassified a wide range of minor offenses, things like a years-old shoplifting charge or minor drug possession, as aggravated felonies under immigration law.
Wait, retroactively?
Yes. Crucially, it applied this retroactively and stripped away the rights of legal permanent residents to appeal their deportations before a judge.
So just to be clear, you could have a green card, have lived in the U.S. for 20 years, get flagged for a minor misdemeanor from a decade ago, and suddenly you are on a plane to Kingston with no recourse.
Exactly. And the most jarring detail in the demographic data is the age of arrival for many of these deportees.
Right. They weren't all adults when they left.
No, many of the individuals being deported were not people who had migrated as adults and maintained strong ties to the island. A significant portion had left Jamaica as infants or toddlers. They had grown up entirely in North American or European environments.
Think about the profound sociological friction that creates for a second. You have someone stepping off a plane in Kingston. On paper, it is their country of citizenship. But in reality, they possess absolutely no cultural footing.
None at all.
They have no local family ties because their entire family is still in New York or London.
Yeah.
They might not even have the local accent. They sound like they're from the Bronx or South London.
It created a severe social shockwave. You had individuals who were fundamentally shaped by North American or British environments suddenly dropped into a developing Caribbean nation.
That's incredibly destabilizing.
In many cases, the research notes this meant the involuntary exportation of North American inner-city realities and survival struggles directly back to Kingston.
The juxtaposition at the airport is just staggering. I want you, the listener, to hold these two realities in your head. On one hand, you have the celebrated returning resident. They're arriving at the customs desk, clearing a massive shipping container full of imported goods, utilizing government tax breaks, ready to build a mansion in the countryside.
Yeah.
And on the exact same day, maybe even at the exact same arrival gate, you have a deportee arriving with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their back, completely alienated from the society they are now forced to navigate.
It highlights a critical structural vulnerability in the circular migration strategy. It exposes the precarious legal tightrope walked by families who operated internationally but lacked formal citizenship in their host countries.
Because if you are part of this global economic network, but you don't have the legal armor of citizenship where you reside, your place in the circle can be violently, permanently disrupted by a single policy shift in a foreign capital.
Exactly. It proves that this transnational network carries both immense generational wealth and immense generational risk.
So if we synthesize these extremes, the voluntary triumph of the retirees and the involuntary fracture of the deportees. How does the diaspora function in the present moment? Where does the data leave us today?
It leaves us with a diaspora that has evolved from a loose collection of migrants into an institutionalized extension of the state. The Jamaican identity today is fully, undeniably transnational.
And the digital age turns that transnational identity from a long-distance relationship into a real-time nervous system. A policy shifts in Kingston, and the diaspora in London or Miami feels the immediate reflex through WhatsApp groups, digital banking apps, and online news portals.
It's instantaneous now.
Right. Consider a nurse working in Miami or a teacher living in South London. They aren't disconnected from the island's daily political or social life just because of their physical geography. They are virtually living in two places at once.
And because of this deep, institutionalized, real-time connection, the flow of capital has matured significantly.
It's not just physical barrels anymore.
No, the data shows it has evolved far beyond the basic survival remittances of the barrel children era, and even beyond the personal retirement investments of the 1990s. We are now seeing direct structural investment in the island's future.
The sources highlight some incredible modern examples of this, specifically noting the Fiwi Roots Project and the Young Dreamers Scholarship. This represents a massive shift in mechanism.
Huge shift.
This isn't just sending a Western Union transfer to pay a cousin's electric bill. This is the diaspora intentionally organizing their wealth, pooling their global resources, and channeling it back into the foundational structures of the country.
They are basically acting as shadow ministries of development. By funding rural classrooms and educational initiatives, they are directly investing in the human capital of the island.
That's amazing.
They are ensuring that the next generation in the exact same rural areas where these epic migratory journeys began decades ago has the resources to succeed, whether they choose to stay or eventually join the global network themselves.
It's an incredible evolution.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, let's step back and look at the massive shift in perspective the data has just walked us through.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
We started by dismantling the myth of linear migration, looking at how the desperate departures of the 1970s evolved into the highly strategic circularity of the 1990s.
Right, and we examine the macroeconomic mechanisms at play, how the dismantling of European banana trade protections created a domestic void, which was filled by a $3.5 billion remittance engine. That effectively turned the diaspora into a decentralized economy.
We explored the ultimate ambition of the Global Jamaican, the triumphant return. We saw how the 1992 customs concessions incentivized a massive transfer of foreign wealth and skills back to the island, physically altering the rural landscape and subverting the traditional Western immigrant dream.
But we also impartially examined the data surrounding the darker side of the circularity. We looked at how the retroactive mechanisms of policies like the 1996 U.S. Immigration Act resulted in a surge of forced deportations.
Dropping people with zero cultural footing back into a country they barely knew, exposing the vulnerabilities of living without formal citizenship.
Exactly. And finally, we saw how this complex network has stabilized today into a real-time nervous system where pooled diaspora wealth is funding initiatives like the Young Dreamers Scholarship.
Proving that the modern diaspora isn't just surviving, it's structurally investing in the nation's future.
Ultimately, the data from this deep dive proves that modern communities, economic ecosystems, and human identity are no longer confined by physical geography. The traditional rules of sovereign borders simply do not apply to the ingenuity of transnational networks.
Which brings me back to that image we started with. Remember that suitcase? The heavy click of the latches, the final look back. We are universally taught that packing that suitcase means you are leaving your country behind.
Right.
But if a nation's people, its economic lifeblood, and its vibrant culture can exist, adapt, and powerfully thrive outside its physical borders, what does the concept of a country even mean in the 21st century? A piece of land? Or is it a network of people? Maybe that suitcase isn't for leaving your home. Maybe in the modern world, the suitcase is just how you carry your country with you. Something to think about.